The desert wind was blowing hard that Tuesday morning when something impossible happened in the Nevada training grounds. Staff Sergeant Jake Rodriguez was running his usual combat training session with 12 new recruits when the air itself seemed to crack open like glass. Nobody saw it coming. One moment Jake was showing the soldiers how to properly hold their stance during hand-to-hand combat practice. The next moment, a strange blue light appeared on the rocky hill about 200 yards away from their training area. The light grew bigger and brighter until it looked like someone had torn a hole in the sky. Then, as quickly as it started, the light disappeared. But something was left behind. Standing on that hill was a figure unlike anything Jake had ever seen in his 15 years of military service. Even from a distance, he could tell this wasn't human. The figure was tall, really tall, maybe 7 feet or more. Its skin had a weird blue glow that made it look like it was made of water and lightning at the same time. Jake squinted his eyes and reached for his binoculars. What he saw through those lenses made his heart skip a beat. The creature had 4 arms, 4 actual arms, each one moving independently like they belonged to different people. Its head was larger than a human head with big black eyes that seemed to take up half its face. The thing was wearing some kind of armor that looked like it was made from materials that didn't exist on Earth. Strange symbols glowed along the sides of the armor, pulsing with the same blue energy as its skin. But what really got Jake's attention were the weapons. This creature was carrying devices that definitely weren't from any military he knew about. They looked like guns, but they hummed with energy and had parts that moved and shifted on their own. Jake had seen a lot of advanced military equipment in his career, but nothing like this. The new recruits were still practicing their moves, completely unaware of what was happening on the hill. Jake made a quick decision to keep them focused on training while he figured out what was going on. He didn't want to cause panic until he knew more about this situation. For the next hour, Jake kept one eye on his students and another on the mysterious visitor. The creature seemed to be watching them too, like it was studying their every move. It would tilt its large head when the soldiers practiced their fighting techniques, and Jake could swear he saw it taking notes on some kind of glowing device. The creature's name was Zarath, though Jake didn't know that yet. She was a warrior from a place so far away that humans didn't even have names for the stars around her home planet. Her people, the Vexani, had been watching Earth for months, trying to decide if it was worth taking over. Zarath had volunteered for this scouting mission because she believed it would be easy. Her commanders had told her that humans were weak, slow, and stupid compared to her people. They said humans only knew how to fight with primitive weapons and had no real combat skills. Looking down at the training session, Zarath felt confident that her commanders were right. These humans moved so slowly compared to her people. They only had 2 arms instead of 4. They couldn't generate bioelectric energy like she could. They seemed to get tired quickly and needed to drink water constantly. But there was something about the human instructor that caught her attention. Unlike the younger soldiers who were still learning, this one moved with purpose and confidence. His techniques were smooth and precise. When he demonstrated a fighting move, it looked almost like a dance. Jake Rodriguez had grown up in a tough neighborhood in Los Angeles before joining the military. He'd learned to fight on the streets before he ever put on a uniform. The military had taught him discipline and proper technique, but the streets had taught him something else: how to survive when you're outmatched. As Jake watched the creature on the hill, his training kicked in. He started thinking like a soldier, instead of panicking like a regular person might. He noticed that the creature seemed to favor its right side when it moved. He saw that it was carrying its weapons in a specific pattern that might indicate which hand was dominant. Most importantly, Jake noticed that the creature was alone. If this was some kind of invasion, where were the others? If this was a scouting mission, why was it showing itself so openly? These questions told Jake that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the hopeless situation it appeared to be. Around noon, when the sun was at its highest point and the desert heat was getting serious, something changed. The creature started moving down the hill toward the training area. It moved with the confident stride of someone who had never lost a fight in their life. Jake told his recruits to take a break and move back to the base. He didn't explain why, and his tone made it clear. They shouldn't ask questions. As the young soldiers jogged away, Jake stood alone in the training area, waiting to see what would happen next. When Zareth reached the bottom of the hill, she was even more impressive up close. Her blue skin wasn't just glowing, it was actually crackling with tiny bolts of electricity. Her forearms moved in perfect coordination, and her large black eyes seemed to see everything at once. She reached into her armor and pulled out a small device that she placed on the ground between them. The device projected a hologram that showed two figures fighting, and then it spoke in perfect English. "Human warrior," the device said in a voice that sounded like it came from a computer. "I am Zareth of the Vexani Empire. I challenge you to single combat to test the fighting ability of your species. Do you accept this challenge?" Jake looked at this 7-foot-tall alien warrior with forearms and weapons that could probably turn him into dust. And he did something that surprised even himself. He smiled. "Yeah," he said. "I accept." Jake stood in the middle of the training ground, looking up at the 7-foot alien warrior who had just challenged him to a fight. The smart thing to do would have been to run back to base and call for backup. But something in his gut told him this might be humanity's only chance to make a good first impression. Zareth looked down at the human with what could only be described as amusement. Through her advanced scanning equipment, she had already analyzed his physical capabilities. This human was 5 feet 10 inches tall and weighed about 180 pounds. Her own body was 7 feet 2 inches and weighed 300 pounds of pure muscle and enhanced bone structure. The alien warrior's forearms moved as she began setting up the terms of their contest. She pulled out several devices from her armor and placed them in a circle around the training area. These devices created a shimmering barrier that would contain their fight and prevent any outside interference. "The rules are simple, human," Zareth said through her translator device. "No weapons, no outside help. We fight until one of us cannot continue or chooses to surrender. These are the honorable terms of combat used throughout the Vexani Empire." Jake nodded, but his mind was already working. He had spent years studying different fighting styles from around the world. Boxing, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, Krav Maga, and even some street fighting techniques he had picked up growing up in tough neighborhoods. But he had never faced anyone with forearms before. "Sounds fair to me," Jake replied, though he was already thinking about how nothing about this situation was actually fair. Zareth began removing her weapons one by one. Each weapon looked like it could level a small building. The plasma rifles hummed with energy as she set them aside. The energy blades crackled with electricity before she powered them down. Jake watched carefully, noting that she handled each weapon with a specific hand which might tell him something about her fighting preferences. "You should know," Zareth said as she removed the last of her weapons, "that my people have conquered 47 different worlds. We have faced warriors from species that could crush metal with their bare hands. We have defeated creatures that could run faster than your vehicles. You humans are not the first to think you can challenge the Vexani." Jake was listening, but he was also observing. The way Zareth stood, the way she moved, the way she gestured with her forearms, it all told him a story. She was incredibly confident, maybe too confident. Her people had clearly never faced a real challenge before. "Tell me about your fighting style," Jake said, trying to gather more information. "I'm curious how someone with 4 arms approaches combat." Zareth seemed pleased by the question. Her large black eyes lit up with pride as she began explaining. "Vexani combat is based on overwhelming superiority. We use our natural advantages to dominate our opponents quickly and completely. 4 arms means 4 times the striking power. Our bioelectric abilities can stun enemies before they can react. Our enhanced strength allows us to break through any defense." As she spoke, Zareth demonstrated some of her techniques. Her 4 arms moved in complex patterns, throwing punches and blocks simultaneously. Electric energy crackled between her fingers as she showed how she could channel power through her strikes. It was impressive, but Jake noticed something important. Every technique she showed was designed for overwhelming a weaker opponent. Her fighting style assumed she would always be stronger, faster, and more powerful than whoever she was facing. There was no flexibility, no adaptation for different situations. It was like watching someone who had only ever played chess against beginners. Jake had grown up very differently. In his neighborhood, you learned to fight people who were bigger, stronger, and meaner than you. You learned to use everything around you. You learned that sometimes the person who looked like they should win didn't always win. Most importantly, you learned that overconfidence could get you hurt real quick. That's really something, Jake said, genuinely impressed by her physical capabilities. My fighting style is probably pretty different from what you're used to. How so? Zareth asked, clearly not considering this human's techniques to be worth much attention. Jake smiled. Well, where I come from, we learned that the bigger they are, the harder they fall. We learned to use our environment. We learned to be unpredictable. And we learned that sometimes the best way to win a fight is to make your opponent think they've already won. Zareth's expression showed confusion. That sounds like deception. True warriors face their opponents with honor and strength, not tricks and lies. Maybe, Jake said, but I've always thought that survival was more important than looking good while you lose. This comment seemed to annoy Zareth. In her culture, there was a proper way to fight and a proper way to lose. Warriors were expected to face each other, directly, using their natural abilities and training. The idea of using deception or environmental advantages was considered cowardly. Your species clearly has much to learn about honor, she said, her voice carrying a tone of disappointment. When we conquer your world, we will teach you the proper way to conduct yourselves in combat. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just about proving who was stronger. This alien warrior was talking about conquering Earth like it was already decided. She was so confident that she was treating this fight like a formality. Conquer our world? Jake asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Of course, Zareth replied casually. Your planet has resources we need. Your species will serve as workers in our empire. This combat is simply to verify that you pose no real threat to our forces. Jake realized that everything had just changed. This wasn't just about two warriors testing each other's skills. This was about the future of the human race. If he lost this fight, Zareth would report back to her people that humans were weak and easy to defeat. If he won, maybe he could buy humanity some time to prepare for what was coming. The weight of that responsibility should have been crushing, but instead, Jake felt something else. He felt focused. All the noise in his head went quiet. All the fear and doubt disappeared. He had been in life-or-death situations before, but never with stakes this high. Well then, Jake said, rolling his shoulders and getting into his fighting stance. I guess we better get started. Zareth looked at his stance and almost laughed. The human was holding his hands up like he was in some primitive boxing match. His feet were positioned like he was planning to dance around instead of fight properly. Everything about his posture suggested he was going to try to avoid her attacks instead of meeting them head-on. This will be over quickly, she thought, to herself as she prepared to show this human what real combat looked like. The fight started exactly how Jake expected it would. Zareth came at him like a freight train with forearms and lightning crackling around her fists. Her first attack was a combination that would have ended most fights in the first 3 seconds. 2 of her arms threw punches aimed at his head while her other 2 arms swept low to take out his legs. Jake had been preparing for this moment from the second he accepted her challenge. He dropped low and rolled to his right, letting all 4 of her strikes hit nothing but desert air. The alien warrior's momentum carried her forward, and Jake noticed something important. When she missed her target, it took her a moment to recover her balance. Interesting, Jake thought as he came back up to his feet. She's used to connecting with every attack. Zareth spun around to face him, her large black eyes showing the first hint of surprise. In all her years of combat training, opponents either blocked her attacks and got overwhelmed, or they tried to dodge and got caught by her secondary strikes. This human had somehow avoided all 4 of her arms at once. Lucky, she said, though her voice carried less confidence than before. Jake didn't respond. He was too busy studying her movement patterns, the way she positioned her feet, how she distributed her weight, which arm she led with when she attacked. Every fighter had habits, and habits could be exploited. Zarath's second attack was faster and more coordinated. She used her bioelectric abilities to enhance her speed, making her forearms move like a blur. But Jake wasn't there when the strikes landed. He had already moved to her left side, staying just outside her reach. This time, Jake didn't just dodge. As Zarath's momentum carried her past him, he landed a quick jab to her ribs. It wasn't a powerful punch, but it was precise. He aimed for a spot where her armor had a joint, and he felt his knuckles connect with something solid. Zarath stumbled slightly and turned to look at him with genuine surprise. In her culture, fights were won through overwhelming force and superior technology. The idea that a weaker opponent could actually land a hit on her was completely foreign. "How did you—" she started to say, but Jake was already moving again. The human had realized something crucial about his opponent. Zarath was incredibly strong and fast, but she fought like someone who had never faced a real challenge. Her techniques were perfect for overwhelming weaker opponents, but they weren't designed for someone who refused to play by her rules. Jake began implementing everything he had learned growing up in tough neighborhoods and fighting in the military. He started moving constantly, never staying in one place long enough for Zarath to land a solid hit. When she swung with her upper arms, he ducked low. When she swept with her lower arms, he jumped or stepped back. But dodging wasn't enough. Jake needed to find a way to actually hurt this alien warrior, and her natural advantages were making that nearly impossible. That's when he remembered something his old boxing coach used to tell him. When you can't outfight them, outsmart them. The training ground was covered with loose sand and small rocks from years of military exercises. Jake started using this to his advantage. As he dodged another one of Zarath's attacks, he kicked sand into the air, creating a small dust cloud. Zarath's large eyes, which were designed to see clearly in the low light of her homeworld, suddenly had trouble tracking her opponent through the floating particles. She blinked rapidly, trying to clear her vision, and in that moment Jake landed another hit, this time to her knee. "This is not honorable combat," Zarath said, her voice showing real frustration for the first time. "This is survival," Jake replied, already moving to avoid her angry counterattack. The alien warrior was getting more aggressive now, which was exactly what Jake had hoped for. Angry fighters made mistakes, and Zarath was starting to make several. She was swinging harder, but less accurately. She was using more energy than necessary. Most importantly, she was fighting emotionally instead of strategically. Jake continued his hit-and-run tactics, landing small strikes whenever he could, and then disappearing before Zarath could retaliate. He hit her joints, her pressure points, and anywhere else her armor didn't provide complete protection. None of the individual hits were devastating, but they were adding up. Meanwhile, Zarath was burning through her energy reserves, trying to catch an opponent who refused to stand still and fight properly. Her bioelectric abilities were powerful, but they required concentration and energy to maintain. The longer the fight went on, the harder it became for her to keep enhancing her speed and strength. After about 10 minutes of this cat-and-mouse game, something unexpected happened. Zarath actually started breathing hard. Her people had incredible physical capabilities, but they had evolved on a world with different atmospheric conditions. The desert heat and Earth's oxygen levels were making it harder for her to maintain her peak performance. Jake, on the other hand, was just getting warmed up. Years of running in full military gear had given him the kind of endurance that could outlast almost anyone. Plus, he was fighting smart instead of fighting hard, conserving his energy while forcing Zarath to waste hers. The alien warrior realized she needed to change her strategy. Instead of trying to overwhelm this slippery human with brute force, she decided to use her environment to her advantage. She grabbed a large rock with two of her arms and hurled it at Jake while attacking with her other two arms. But Jake had been expecting something like this. He rolled under the flying rock and came up inside Zarath's guard, landing a solid punch to her solar plexus. For the first time in the fight, the alien warrior actually staggered backward. "Impossible," she gasped, looking down at the human, who had just made her step back. Jake didn't waste time celebrating. He could see that Zarath was starting to tire, but she was still incredibly dangerous. One solid hit from any of her four arms could still end the fight in her favor. He needed to stay focused and keep pressing his advantage. The next few minutes of combat were intense. Zareth tried everything she could think of to land a decisive blow. She used her bioelectric abilities to create small lightning bolts that she threw at Jake. She tried grappling techniques that should have been impossible for a two-armed opponent to escape. She even attempted to use intimidation, roaring in her alien language to try to frighten him. But Jake had grown up in places where being scared could get you hurt or worse. He had faced bullies, gang members, and enemy soldiers who were all trying to intimidate him. A 7-foot alien warrior was definitely the most unusual opponent he had ever faced. But the principles remained the same: stay calm, stay smart, and never give up. By the time they had been fighting for 20 minutes, both fighters were showing signs of wear. Zareth's perfect blue skin was now covered with dust and small cuts from Jake's precise strikes. Her breathing was labored, and her attacks were noticeably slower than when the fight had started. Jake was tired too, but he was used to pushing through exhaustion. More importantly, he could see something in Zareth's eyes that hadn't been there before. For the first time in her life, the alien warrior was beginning to doubt that she would win this fight. The sun was now directly overhead, turning the Nevada desert into a furnace. Sweat was pouring down Jake's face, but he could see that Zareth was struggling even more with the heat. Her blue skin, which had been glowing with energy at the start of the fight, was now looking dull and tired. 25 minutes into their battle, Zareth made a decision that would change everything. She was tired of this human's annoying hit-and-run tactics. She was tired of missing her attacks. Most of all, she was tired of feeling like she wasn't in control of this fight. "Enough games!" she roared, and Jake could hear the frustration in her voice even through the mechanical translator. The alien warrior planted her feet firmly in the sand and began gathering bioelectric energy between all 4 of her hands. Jake had seen her use small bolts of electricity during the fight, but this was different. The air around her started crackling with power, and Jake could actually feel the hair on his arms standing up from the electrical charge. Zareth was preparing to use one of her most powerful attacks. In her military training, this technique was called the Conquest Strike, a massive discharge of bioelectric energy that could stun or even kill most opponents. She had never needed to use it in actual combat before, but this stubborn human was forcing her to reveal abilities she had kept in reserve. Jake realized he was in serious trouble. The amount of electricity building up around Zareth could probably power a small city. If that energy hit him directly, the fight would be over in the worst possible way. But as he watched her prepare the attack, Jake noticed something that gave him hope. During their battle, Zareth's translator device had been knocked loose from her armor. The small machine was now lying in the sand about 10 feet away from where they were fighting. Jake remembered from his military electronics training that most advanced devices had some kind of conductive materials in them. As Zareth raised all 4 arms to launch her devastating attack, Jake did something that surprised even himself. Instead of running away from the electrical blast, he dove toward the translator device. "Die, primitive human," Zareth screamed as she released all of her stored bioelectric energy at once. The blast was incredible. Lightning shot out from her 4 hands in a concentrated beam that could have melted steel. But Jake wasn't where she expected him to be. He had grabbed the translator device and was using it like a lightning rod, redirecting the electrical energy harmlessly into the ground. The look of shock on Zareth's face was priceless. She had just used enough energy to level a small building, and the human was still standing there completely unharmed. Worse yet, she had drained most of her remaining energy reserves with that attack. "How did you know to do that?" she gasped, staring at Jake with something that looked like respect for the first time. Jake smiled as he tossed the now smoking translator device aside. "Back home, we learn to use whatever's available. Plus, I've been struck by lightning once before. It's not an experience you forget." That wasn't entirely true, but Jake figured a little psychological warfare might help at this point. The truth was he had just made an educated guess based on his basic knowledge of electrical conductivity and hoped for the best. Zareth was now in real trouble. She had used up most of her bioelectric abilities and was physically exhausted from 25 minutes of intense combat in Earth's harsh desert environment. Her forearms, which had seemed like such an overwhelming advantage at the start, now felt heavy and slow. Jake could see the change in his opponent, but he also knew he couldn't get overconfident. Zareth was still 7 feet tall, incredibly strong, and had natural fighting abilities that far exceeded normal human capabilities. One mistake on his part could still turn the entire fight around. The next phase of their battle was different from everything that had come before. Both fighters were tired, both were running on determination more than energy, and both knew that the end was approaching fast. Zareth tried to use her superior reach and strength to her advantage, but Jake's constant movement had taught him her patterns. When she swung with her upper right arm, he knew her lower left would follow. When she stepped forward with her right foot, he knew she favored attacking with her left side arms. Jake began landing more hits, targeting the same spots he had been hitting throughout the fight. Her left knee was getting weaker from repeated strikes. Her right shoulder was starting to drop from fatigue. Most importantly, her breathing was becoming more labored with each passing minute. The decisive moment came when Zareth made one final attempt to end the fight with brute force. She tried to grab Jake with all 4 arms at once, planning to use her superior strength to crush him in a bear hug that no human could escape. But Jake had been waiting for exactly this kind of desperate move. As Zareth lunged forward with all 4 arms extended, Jake used a technique he had learned years ago in jiu-jitsu class. Instead of trying to fight against her strength, he used her own momentum against her. Jake stepped to the side and grabbed 2 of Zareth's arms, using her forward motion to throw her off balance. At the same time, he swept his leg behind her, knees taking advantage of the weakness he had created there with his repeated strikes. The result was spectacular. The 7-foot alien warrior, who had seemed unstoppable at the beginning of their fight, crashed to the ground with Jake on top of her. More importantly, Jake had managed to trap 2 of her arms in a position where she couldn't use them effectively. With only 2 arms free and Jake controlling her position, Zareth found herself in a submission hold that she had never encountered before. Her people's fighting techniques were all based on overwhelming force and superior technology. They had never developed ground fighting skills because they never expected to end up on the ground. Jake applied pressure to the hold, being careful not to seriously injure his opponent but making it clear that he could if necessary. "Do you surrender?" he asked, breathing hard but still in control. Zareth struggled against the hold for several seconds, using all of her remaining strength to try to break free. But Jake's position was too good, and she was too exhausted to overcome his technique with raw power. For the first time in her entire life, the proud Vexani warrior was completely helpless. She could not break free, she could not use her natural abilities, and she could not find any way to turn the fight back in her favor. The word surrender did not exist in her native language. Her people conquered or died. They never gave up. But lying there in the desert sand, held in place by a technique she didn't understand, Zareth realized that her entire worldview was about to change. She started to say, then stopped. What she was about to do went against everything she had been taught about honor, strength, and the superiority of her people. Jake waited patiently, maintaining the hold, but not increasing the pressure. He could feel that the fight had gone out of his opponent, but he needed to hear her say the words. The silence stretched for what felt like forever. Jake could feel Zareth's muscles tense and relax as she fought an internal battle that was probably harder than their physical fight had been. Finally, in a voice so quiet he almost missed it, she spoke. "I surrender." Jake immediately released the hold and stepped back, giving the alien warrior space to get up. He had won, but he didn't feel like celebrating. Looking at Zareth as she slowly rose to her feet, Jake could see something in her large black eyes that he recognized from his own past. The look of someone whose entire world had just been turned upside down. Zareth stood there for a moment, staring at her own 4 hands like she had never seen them before. Her whole life she had been taught that physical superiority meant victory. Her people had conquered dozens of worlds, using overwhelming force and advanced technology. The idea that she could lose to someone weaker than her was so foreign that her mind was struggling to process what had just happened. Jake reached into his gear and pulled out a water bottle. Without saying anything, he offered it to Zareth. She looked at the bottle suspiciously at first, then took it and drank deeply. The desert heat had been brutal for both of them, but Jake realized it must have been especially hard for someone from another planet. "Your fighting style," Zareth said finally, her voice thoughtful. "It is unlike anything in our combat databases. You did not try to overpower me or use superior technology. You used, what is the word? Cunning." Jake sat down on a nearby rock, gesturing for Zareth to do the same. She hesitated for a moment, then sat across from him. It was strange seeing this 7-foot alien warrior looking almost vulnerable after their intense battle. "Where I grew up," Jake said, "being the strongest or having the best weapons didn't always mean you won. Sometimes the smallest kid in the neighborhood was the one nobody wanted to mess with because he was smart about picking his battles and knew how to use everything around him." Zareth tilted her large head, processing this information. "Your species has always had to fight against superior opponents." "Pretty much," Jake replied. "Humans have been dealing with things bigger, stronger, and more dangerous than us since the beginning. Bears, lions, other humans with better weapons, natural disasters, diseases, you name it. We learned to survive by being adaptable, working together, and never giving up even when things looked hopeless." The alien warrior was quiet for several minutes, staring out at the desert landscape. Jake could almost see her mind working, reevaluating everything she thought she knew about humans and combat and maybe even life itself. "In all our conquest campaigns," Zareth said slowly, "we have never encountered a species like yours. The others either surrender immediately when they see our superior technology, or they fight with brute force and are quickly defeated. You did neither." Jake nodded. "That's because humans are kind of weird that way. The harder you push us, the more creative we get about pushing back. And we have this annoying habit of refusing to accept that we're beaten even when we probably should be." Zareth looked directly at him with those large black eyes. "You could have seriously injured me when you had me in that hold. Your species is capable of mercy even toward enemies." "Of course," Jake said, surprised by the question. "You weren't trying to kill me, just defeat me. Plus, fighting you taught me that your people probably aren't evil. Just different. Maybe we can find a way to coexist without anyone having to conquer anyone else." This concept seemed to shock Zareth even more than losing the fight had. In her culture, there were only 2 types of species, those who ruled and those who served. The idea of equals working together was completely foreign to her understanding of how the universe worked. Jake stood up and walked over to where Zareth had left her weapons. He picked up one of the plasma rifles, examined it for a moment, then carried it back to her. Zareth watched him approach with obvious confusion. "These belong to you," Jake said, offering her the weapon. Zareth stared at the rifle like it might explode. "You are returning my weapons after defeating me? This makes no sense. I am your prisoner now. You should take my equipment and interrogate me for information about my people's invasion plans." Jake sat back down and smiled. "Maybe that's exactly the kind of thinking that got you into trouble during our fight. You keep assuming everyone else thinks the same way your people do." The alien warrior took her weapon, but didn't activate it. Instead, she continued staring at Jake like he was the most confusing puzzle she had ever encountered. "If I return to my people and report what happened here," she said slowly, "they will not believe me. A human defeating a Vexani warrior in single combat is considered impossible." "What if you don't go back?" Jake asked. "At least not right away. What if you stayed here for a while and learned more about how humans actually live and think? Your people are making plans based on bad information. Maybe you could help them understand that conquering Earth might not be as easy as they think." Zareth was quiet for a long time. Jake could see her processing everything that had happened, not just the fight, but the entire encounter. Finally, she reached into her armor and pulled out a small device that looked like a crystal. "This is a communication beacon," she explained. "I was supposed to activate it after confirming that your species poses no threat to our invasion forces." She held the device for several seconds, then did something that surprised both of them. She threw it on the ground and crushed it under her boot. "I cannot report that humans are weak when I have just been defeated by one," she said. and I cannot recommend invasion when I do not fully understand what we would be facing." Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had won more than just a fight. He had bought humanity time to prepare for whatever was coming. Over the next few hours, as the desert sun began to set, Jake and Zarath continued talking. She told him about her people's empire, their technology, and their belief that might makes right. He told her about human history, about how many times his species had overcome impossible odds through cooperation, innovation, and sheer stubborn determination. By the time the stars came out, Zarath was beginning to understand that she had made a mistake that went far beyond underestimating a single human warrior. Her entire species had underestimated what it meant to be human. "Your people will not be easily conquered," she admitted as they watched the desert stars appear in the darkening sky. "No," Jake agreed. "They won't be. But maybe they don't have to be conquered at all. Maybe there's a better way for our species to meet each other." Zarath looked at him with something that might have been hope. "You really believe that?" Jake smiled and offered her his hand to shake, a human gesture she had never seen before. After a moment's hesitation, she reached out with one of her 4 hands and grasped his. "I believe that today, a human and an alien sat down together and had a conversation instead of trying to destroy each other," Jake said. "That seems like a pretty good start to me." As they shook hands under the desert stars, both warriors realized that sometimes the most important victories happen not on the battlefield, but in the quiet moments afterward when enemies choose to become something else entirely.